Outreach, and today having the opportunity to interview Maria Lopez-Knowles. She is the founder and CEO of Second Generation Soy, has had, I think, approximately 30 years of experience in multicultural and Hispanic-focused marketing, working with clients such as Microsoft, Visa, and H&R Block. So I'm very honored at the opportunity and excited for you to share your insights. Thank you so much, Maria, for being on the call.
Oh, my pleasure. It's my pleasure.
So I wanted you to share a little bit of your insights when it comes to, of course, just Hispanic marketing in general. And you know, one of the biggest things that we always talk about and what I hear from others is that they will translate, or what I see is people will translate their documents or translate their marketing materials, but often not pay attention to the culture being translated as well. So I wanted to hear your thoughts on, you know, how important that really is and what that kind of looks like in translating not only language but also culture in your marketing.
Sure, yeah. So culture is probably paramount in many ways. I mean, the language matters, obviously, because if someone doesn't speak the English language, you need to reach them in Spanish or whatever their native language is. But culture matters, and it matters a lot when you're talking to different generations of the Hispanic market. So if you're talking to a first-generation foreign-born immigrant that's Spanish language dominant, their culture is primarily that of a collective culture. It's much more about family and friends over themselves. So they're much more focused on the greater good and the community and less on themselves. As you go through generational levels, they become more and more assimilated, if you will, so they become more and more like the American ethos, which is much more informed by the Protestant work ethic and the value of self-reliance. We very much cherish independence and acting alone. That's part of the value set that we as Americans have. So if you look at a Hispanic family across generations, language is paramount for the first generation because they're primarily Spanish language dominant, and the collectivist culture is paramount for them. But if you look at their kids, especially the ones that are born here, the second generation, their language would be primarily English, but not exclusively. So they tend to be bilingual. So you want to reach them in English, and you want to spice up your copy, if you will, with a couple of words in Spanish so that it truly not just reaches them but touches them as well, because it's culturally and linguistically relevant. And they are really hybrids in the sense that they have a duality that's really collective and self-reliant. When you reach the third generation, it's primarily English as well, and depending on the DMA, you want to introduce a couple of Spanish words or keep it all English. But by fourth generation, you really have an assimilated group here. So English is fine as a language, and in terms of the culture and the ethos, self-reliance makes a lot of sense. And I know it's hard to put this into practice without context, so I'll give you some context to help you understand the cultural relevance and how that matters. I had a client years ago that was a large retailer. And they translated, all they did was translate their ads from English to Spanish to target the Hispanic market. And they didn't do well. They didn't understand why they weren't doing well. Well, as we did some research, we realized the message you have translated is one about comfort. But the clothes we sell makes you feel comfortable. That is a very self-reliant value. To be comfortable, you really don't care much about what other people think because your hierarchy leads with comfort. So that's a very American message. There's nothing wrong with that, but if your target is a first-generation Hispanic that's all about the collective, they want to buy attire that makes them look good for others because they care more about the community than they do about themselves. So that's where cultural nuance plays a critical role in not just reaching your target, but touching them affectively and making that connection with them.
Amazing. That's a perfect example. That's exactly, you know, especially whenever you're looking at the traditional Hispanic market or first generation, like you were talking about, I think those values tend to be a little bit more noticeable. But you were mentioning the duality in second generation or third generation Hispanic markets, and particularly looking at Hispanic millennials. Are there any examples or thoughts you have on really being able to appeal to that kind of duality, or both Hispanic and traditional American values?
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the things to note is that millennials, and we're talking typically the age group of 18 to 34, especially those that are born here, they've struggled. And I say struggle because it is a struggle to have that conflict in your ethos, which is so paramount to who we are as individuals, to recognize that they are part of a collective family, but that they strive to be independent as well. I've sat through many, many focus groups in my career, which I've thoroughly enjoyed. And one of the things I have seen and heard over and over again, when you ask a second generation, what are your motivators? They'll say family, but self too. So you see that hybridity, the hybridity actually verbalized. They without knowing it, they're saying that. So any type of advertising or communication that puts them in a very authentic environment where they're forced to live that collectivity, but at the same time want to recognize and validate their need for independence, and that's not a negative thing, it's a positive thing, the better your advertising will resonate.
Perfect. Yeah, that's really interesting. So a lot of people obviously don't have that kind of background or knowledge about differences in values and how to really, appeal to a mass market, but also appeal to some of these more niche markets. And the Hispanic market has grown significantly over the last few years. I think it's a very high priority, particularly in the housing industry. So just to kind of close things out a little bit, can you share what your insights are and what you've seen over the last 30 years or so, however long you've been working in this, and changes in how Hispanic marketing has become more and more important or crucial to businesses?
Yeah, for sure. So obviously the market's growing. If you look at the 2010 census, Hispanics contributed over half the growth in the U.S. population over the previous 10 years. So from 2000 to 2010, and it's only going to continue to grow because we have an aging non-Hispanic white population that's decreasing in size. And the growth of the Hispanic market isn't coming so much from immigration, it's coming from nativity. So it's the children of immigrants. That's what's driving the growth. So the biggest change I've seen over the last decade for sure is that as the growth comes from the children, the tactics need to change to reach the children. And let me just back up and say it's critical path to reach the children of immigrants, even as they are adults, because what happens with immigrant kids is they become the Sherpas for their foreign-born parents, meaning they take on that guide role, they translate the language, they interpret the U.S. ethos for the parents, they demystify new products and services, they inform brand decisions at a very early age for their family. So they act as this Uber Sherpa that becomes the guide in the new culture. And what we've seen over time is because the growth is so explosive of the children of immigrants, that advertisers are now starting to really focus on them, not just because they've grown quantitatively, but because qualitatively they recognize that individual as one of great influence. So their sphere of influence is larger, it's a collective family, and if you reach them and touch them in a way that makes a connection, which can be done online, because this whole group flooded online when the internet exploded, and that's where they have found their sweet spot, if you will, when it comes to media. They spend a lot of time online, a lot of time on social networks, a lot of time creating content on their own. They didn't see themselves above the line, if you will, in radio and TV growing up. So they went online to see themselves and connect with others like them. So the biggest shifts have been media from Spanish language TV and radio to bilingual online. And I think we're going to continue to see that for a while because it's just starting to explode right now.
Yeah, definitely. Well, you've touched on some really great points. I really appreciate you sharing all of these insights, being on the call, and I really appreciate your time.
Thank you. My pleasure.